and welcome to Doctor Who 50 years ago, the show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1966 and looks at what's different between then and now. This week, the concluding episode of Power of the Daleks, episode 6. That last one. I am Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go into the news from 1966. On Sunday, December the 4th, there is a doctor by the name of William Foege, I guess. Pronunciation is not the best. Who first implements the surveillance and containment strategy that would eventually eliminate smallpox throughout the world. So that's quite an advancement in health.
Interestingly, in the 90s, the X-Files would go on about all of this and the smallpox eradication. So this is obviously something big and interesting that's done by the government that writers, even 30 years in the future, will continue to be able to make stories about.
Into sci-fi, no less.
Indeed.
On Monday, December the 5th, the US Supreme Court unanimously rules that Julian Bond, who was a civil rights leader and a politician in Georgia, had been improperly denied a seat in the Georgia House of Representatives. His disqualification, criticism of American policies in the Vietnam War, had been a violation of Bond's right to free speech, also known as the First Amendment. This, the Georgia House of Representatives reluctantly administered the oath of office in January 1967.
The establishment is still very pro-Vietnam and refuses to accept anyone being elected to office as anti-Vietnam. So it's ignoring the public, essentially.
It's rather anti-democratic. The fact that they're not allowed to be criticised for their involvement in the war. On Tuesday, December the 6th, over 2 days, South Korean troops purportedly killed 456 men, women and children in 2 villages in the Quang Ngai province of South Vietnam. That was at least all the inhabitants of the villages of Binh Hue and An Phuoc. This may have happened in October, because I remember talking about it in an episode of The Smugglers. On Wednesday, December the 7th, in Spacey News, the first experimental equatorial synchronous satellite was launched, the ATS-1, which was capable of taking full photos of the Western Hemisphere every 30 minutes. This is the introduction of technology which becomes an indispensable part of weather analysis and forecasting. Oh look, there's a giant hurricane there, maybe you want to evacuate, that sort of thing. Also on that day, back in South Vietnam, a leading candidate for the presidency was assassinated by a member of the Viet Cong on special orders.
Okay. So we can see that everyone's rising up not both through counterculture, but also through actively taking the stance of let's shoot all of them.
Yes, mainly as an alternative way of expressing their political affiliations, because obviously the current way through democratic means has obviously been completely relegated to uselessness because of the dominant establishment. And so the only way they can see their ways of getting their methods expressed, these other people, these younger generation maybe, is through political violence. And finally, on Saturday, December the 10th, in the worst episode of Friendly Fire up to that time, 16 US Marines were killed and 11 injured when an American bomber dropped 2 250-pound bombs on them. And that was the news.
Yeah.
So I guess, shall we move on to what we thought of the serial, or the episode and the serial as a whole?
Best Dalek story? Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
I can't think of any contenders.
Oh, there's a couple that I think rival it, but it is definitely one of the best.
It's only when you're pushing like Rob Shearman's Dalek or Genesis or Remembrance and like Rob Shearman's one was based on this one, so.
Yeah, I guess it's only really Genesis or Remembrance that really
contend.
Yeah. But
this was definitely what the Daleks needed. This six-parter. It was a well-paced, highly tense political thriller / actiony thing with the Daleks in.
And they don't pull any punches when it comes to the scenes when the Daleks attack the rebels and the guards.
It is so visceral and creepy.
Right. So the actiony stuff begins with the Daleks rolling around, ready for the time to strike. Some of them run into the guards, taking the Doctor and Polly back to the prison. They retreat away from the armed Daleks. They're being backed into a corner. Janley's revolution is quite literally won, but Bragan isn't finished yet, though. He wants Valmar and the other revolutionaries killed. Tomorrow it'll be my turn to be overthrown, is his mantra. Essentially, Bragan wants to kill everyone that doesn't conform to his absolute rule, and persuades Janley forcefully. But unfortunately for him, Valmar overhears, and this turns into the Doctor's side for good. And this starts a wonderful layer of political intrigue.
That's what's so interesting about Bragan in this story. He has the Dalek mindset. Yeah. He doesn't have the same visceral hatred, because, as we'll see later on, he sits behind his desk, whereas the Daleks go out and they get their hands dirty, killing everyone. We got the man of the establishment trying to run things, whereas you got sort of the rebels who are able to go out Viet Cong style and actually attack. It's got the impetuosity of the establishment and the power of that rebel.
Well, yeah, and there's a causal link. It's because of the man at the top, the establishment, doing approximately naff all, that it leads to these rebels killing everyone and everything. So the Doctor and Quinn take out their guards and run. Bragan establishes temporary control, in inverted commas, and gets ready to kill the rebels. The Doctor and his party, including Polly, reunite with Valmar and the reappeared Ben, back fresh from his holiday. Once he's gotten Ben and Polly to a safe place, he runs off, which is the worst time ever, because the Daleks commence their extermination, killing guards, rebels and colonists alike. And whilst he's running about trying to stop the Daleks, he has to hide in the crossfire. Yes, this extermination makes the rebels completely uneasy because they're being counter-revolted against, really. So Janley argues with Valmar, trying to use Daleks to stop Bragan. The various Daleks there, persuading them that they're on their side, which leads to the conversation of, can we trust them? Oh yeah, we must. Which is bad decision number 5 million in this episode.
This is one of the many instances of what I think is the worst part of the story. We will fight for you. All of those little backtracks by the Daleks, they smack of Doctor Who trying to be a children's show and pandering to the younger audiences. I can't get into it at all.
There's action aplenty. Bragan sees the rebels fighting the Daleks as an insurrection, or at least the rebels versus the guards. And then the Daleks come and exterminate them all. Janley and Valmar realise this too late, and another Dalek line, your usefulness is over. Which you could argue that's what presidential candidates say to the electorate once they've been elected. But there we are. I'm obviously talking about Ronald Reagan. Right. Excellent. Even I can get on the Trump bandwagon. Right. Christ. In the laboratory, the Doctor, Polly and Ben look for the answer. They're almost spotted by the Daleks, but the insane Lesterson hides them. And in comes a scientific mantra. He's completely off his rocker. He says they're marvellous creatures, they're the new species, you see, and that man's had his day, finished now. That sort of thing. The fact that the Daleks are this even younger generation, you could argue, that have seen what the older generation are doing, have managed to use their weaknesses against them, and now are going to take over everything and kill. So there.
Mhm. But what's interesting is the way he accepts that, and what I really like is how alien he knows the Daleks to be. He's the only one in this serial who actually sees the Dalek creatures, and so it's almost as though the older generation are resigned to the fact that this younger generation are going to take over, but they still see them as this obscene, mutated entity that, that they can't comprehend. And when they try, it's as though they're going mad, because that's what it must have been like for someone from the 1910s to someone who looked at all the hippie culture going on in the 60s. How do you even process that?
Yeah, I like that. Because of his guilt about releasing the Daleks and being so naive, this guilt manifests as his insanity of just accepting the Daleks, and to the point where he even just mimics them, doesn't he? Which I find quite disturbing. But it's quite good that he mimics them, I think.
Yeah, that's his attempt to conform in a desperate attempt to survive, which ultimately fails. So through the Mad Lesterson, they learn of the solution. The Valmar's secret power cable connected to the colony's power supply. Is that a Deus Ex Machina? Probably. Because it hasn't really been officially recognised until now. So there. Quinn managed to save Valmar from some Dalek crossfire, but Janley fights to her death. The revolutionary is given a obituary of "she wasn't as bad as you think," so that's a way of sealing off her character. Not exactly Fidel Castro, but there we are. The Doctor buys some time through the callous way of persuading Bragan to use his guards as meat shields whilst he works on the solution, which is the beginnings of a slightly manipulative Doctor, whilst he runs around like an impish clown whilst all this death is going on, desperately trying to save the colony. So said Bragan has gone mad because he quite literally lost his power, and makes a desperate plea for the Daleks to stop their killing, which is very much unheard.
I think it's this bit that he goes on about they must obey his law.
Yes.
It's interesting that the Daleks also go on about the law of the Daleks.
I think it's meant to compare them as humans and Daleks, isn't
it? And just while we're on the law here, I looked up the TV Century 21 comics that David Whittaker wrote. And when the Emperor Dalek is made in that story, he says a thing about something like, "We must build more machines," and the caption reads, "The first Dalek Emperor had spoken. His word is law."
Right.
Yeah.
But yes, without much power, Bragan has very little he can do other than actually be persuaded by Quinn to give the Doctor time. So the Doctor and his party rig up the cables to destroy the Daleks. They have to hide from them, and Lesterson inadvertently buys them time by giving himself away. We go through the final mantra of "I am your servant," and yes, you gave us life, at which point Lesterson is killed. And so you could arguably say this is the turning point of the story, where the Daleks kill pretty much their creator, in inverted commas, or at least the ones who gave them power, the older generation, and that is their downfall, you could argue. The Doctor's meddling seemingly fails, initially, but then he randomly hits it, I think, and that combined Dalek gun blows up the controls, overloads the power, and the Daleks and everything explodes. As I said earlier in the episode, just before a baby is killed. That imagery's there. It's symbolising how this younger generation now has complete control, is able to kill anybody ever, but somehow, and it's a fairly weak metaphor, they are overloaded, they have too much power, and everything sort of collapses. That's what usually happens, isn't it?
Yeah, happened to the Romans.
Sure, the Daleks are Romans. Let's go with that. Excellent. Bene vidi vici exterminatum. Yes.
Now, of course, you know Latin, don't you, Ben?
Well, sort of. I got a B in A level. So there. I mean,
no, I'm just not surprised that you know.
No, Bene vidi vici. Come on, I've got to know that. It's from the fires of Pompeii.
Well, I thought it was pronounced Weni Widi Vici.
It is. That's why I don't know about Latin. Let's move on. Christ. So yes, the Daleks blow up, and the colony is pretty much wrecked. Also, a power vacuum happens. Bragan tries to reassert control, and is shot by Valmar, the last political murder in this story. So there. And it's up to Quinn and Valmar to rebuild together. There's a lot of clearing up to be done, says one of them, which is the understatement of the century.
This is possibly my only real problem with the serial, which is that it's over what feels like too quickly. The Dalek, it does set up the Daleks getting beaten through the power and everything. It takes a while, but when the Doctor finally sets the plan in motion, it happens very quickly.
But at least this one writes in a character moment into it, with the Doctor saying, "Oh, did I mean to do that?" And he's trying to convince people that it was an accident, which is interesting enough in itself.
Yeah.
You know?
This is your new Doctor, folks. Did you actually mean to destroy the Daleks? You weren't very convincing in telling them that they needed to be stopped, argue Ben and Polly as they go back to the TARDIS after running away from the colony because they don't want the bill, quite literally. And now we are sagged with the bill. Modern Doctor Who joke! Oh, God. And so the Doctor very snidely doesn't admit whether he meant for the colonists to kill each other. And they all get in the TARDIS and go to the sound of recorder music as a dead Dalek's eye stalk rises to watch the TARDIS dematerialise from the planet of Vulcan. So that was the power of the Daleks. 5 episodes of build-up and a slightly disappointing denouement, but quite a good political thriller, in my opinion.
So episode 1 does feel a touch different, but that's because it's the regeneration episode. So that sort of, I think that's what makes it so good. The pacing, I feel, I know it's written very well, but I feel it's more like it's more like 4 episodes of build-up rather than 5, which I think makes it that much faster paced, I think.
Wow. It's so good. It's absolutely... Paul Cornell, I've probably mentioned this fact before, but he said that this was a complete essay in pacing, and it is an essay in everything else as well. It has everything you could ever want from any story told ever, basically. And it's not perfect is the nastiest thing you can say about it, because it damn near is.
Mm.
Is it 10 out of 10s all round for us?
Yes.
Ben?
9 out of 10.
9?
Because I don't know what perfection. I don't know what perfection is. I don't.
What about people in 1966? What score would they give it?
I think they give it an 8 or a 9. maybe an 8.
Why
Because
the
they were uncertain as to what Patrick Troughton's Doctor would be, and yes, I'm basing this on the audience research reports that came out at the time, and I've got a bit of information about it, but they would see it as quite a good story. Of course, it lives up through the ages, and ultimately they will settle down to the role of Patrick Troughton's Doctor because that's what audiences do.
Yeah, I would, rather than my personal 10, I think it would be a 9 as well, because of the doubts over Patrick Troughton, even though they're unfounded. Although, I mean, in this story, he hasn't quite, well, not he the actor, but the writers haven't quite nailed down what they want the character to be precisely just yet. And I think the recorder is a bit overused in this one as well. I don't like that.
Okay. I agree with all of you, especially looking at the modern Doctor Who. Everyone seems to take against the new Doctor for a bit and then warm up to it. So that effect must have been quite magnified when they didn't know what was going on.
I guess now that we finished discussing the serial, we could talk about some interesting little facts about Power of the Daleks. According to the second Doctor handbook, the total expenditure was £17,254, or roughly about £326,000 in modern money. So, for comparison, A New Who is rumoured to have £1 million per episode budget. So, this is about only 30% of the cost of a New Who episode.
They spent £1 million on Hellbent.
In fact, they probably spent more than $1 million on Hellbent because it's 13 million. No, it's 13 million a series. So they probably hijacked some of the money from a couple of the other ones in order to make Hellbent.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Okay.
All this makes me think is you have to admire the ingenuity of the Doctor Who team in the 60s, that they could make it so much more cheaply and still not look that terrible.
I have a little piece here from Rob Shearman's Running Through Corridors, when he talks about Running Through Corridors is a thing he did with Toby Haydock, which was a marathon of Doctor Who. The one about the 70s is coming out in January, but this is the one about the 60s. And he says about episode 5, what I tried to capture in Dalek, not nearly as well as David Whittaker did, I know, was that sense that however evil a Dalek might be, it at least has its own moral code and personal integrity. In contrast to all those wonderful scenes of efficient Dalek unity on the conveyor belts, you get mankind here at its most base and mendacious.
Yep.
When a Dalek asks Bragan why, as a fellow human, he would want to kill Hensel, it suggests that we're going to baser instincts. It's a far cry from the last story, in which the Cybermen were offered as an alternative to all that characterized man. When at the cliffhanger the Daleks announce that they're now ready to wipe out the colonists, you feel some sort of relief, because these human beings deserve all that's coming to them. The original title for this episode was The Destiny of Doctor Who, which I think is quite interesting, because it shows that it was trying to solidify in the episode title, this is how the show's going to be from now on.
The head of serials at the time, Sean Sutton, introduced Sidney Newman to Patrick Troughton as the second Doctor Who about August 1966. He wasn't pleased with it, but he was eventually talked around. Producer Innes Lloyd wanted to make the second Doctor a pirate of the skies before being persuaded by Newman to make him a cosmic hobo, to rough him up, to make him zany. And obviously that has endured in Patrick Troughton's Doctor to this day. How people remember him. Lesterson was described throughout the script as a cheerful enthusiast in his mid-50s, as a dedicated scientist, more in the Brunanowski mould, who, from research I can see, he's a guy who documented the effects of the nuclear bombs of World War II, I'm not too sure whether that means he's a bad guy. But yeah, he's moulded in the Broninsky mould rather than the Rutherford mould, who was a nuclear physicist and probably a good guy, I guess. That's how Lesterson was described. The whole nuclear aspect is also in the script still for episode 3, with the Doctor originally warning about the Daleks by saying, "One Dalek is far more dangerous than a string of atomic missiles." Troughton started out as clownish, he said as much, a Harpo Marx character, but he mellowed out over time. Resno's actor, Resno, you remember him, Edward Kelsey, said that Troughton proudly announced to the whole production team that he'd been taught to play the recorder by his small son.
Oh, that's nice.
To the point where he apparently badgered the production team to put him in the credits as the guy who copyrights the music.
Did that happen?
No. We obviously don't have the credits, do we? And Troughton's son is not in the credits. The Power of the Daleks was placed against professional wrestling and Opportunity Knocks on the various regions of ITV. The BBC executives were impressed by Troughton, but apparently little else. Reactions from the surveyed public were mixed to good, I'd say. One reaction that caught my eye was from a senior clerk who said he was a sci-fi fan. "This is supposed to be for the kids, but I must confess I found the programme quite gripping." Which, in our view, is the correct answer, wouldn't you say? Yeah. Obviously, one teacher didn't like it. He said that Troughton had turned the Doctor into a clown rather than an eccentric scientist, but that's the thing with change. You've got to get used to it. And hopefully it'll be written good and acted performed well. And the legacy of this episode: Australia, New Zealand and Singapore are known to have purchased copies of Power, with various cuts made, which explains all the surviving footage. Apart from the moving telesnaps and all that. The film copies were wiped by 1974, and by 1977 all the episodes and inserts of Power had all been wiped. And that was The Power of the Daleks. Its legacy lives on, from Doctor Who 50 years ago. Thank you very much for watching. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes, where you can comment and rate us. We're also on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe, and other internety things, including Google+, if you dare. So yes, we'll be back next week in good old Scotland, with episode 1 of The Highlanders. Until then, I have been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye.